Mattel was the undisputed king of the toy world until one designer decided to burn their empire down. I am going to show you how a dumpster-dived prototype fueled a billion-dollar corporate betrayal. In 2000, Carter Bryant sat in his beige cubicle, sketching the very doll that would eventually dismantle his employer's monopoly. He wasn't just daydreaming during his lunch break. He was building a billion-dollar rival right under his boss's nose, and they didn't suspect a single thing until it was too late. By 1995, Carter had landed what most designers would consider a dream job in the Barbie collectibles department. He spent his days surrounded by pink glitter and the squeaky clean perfection of the world's most famous fashion icon. But for a creative soul like Carter, this pristine environment felt less like a career and more like a suffocating plastic cage. Mattel operated less like a toy company and more like a corporate fortress. Their executives guarded Barbie's wholesome, all-American image with an iron fist, and every design Carter submitted had to survive a gauntlet of rigid, outdated rules. No edgy clothes, no dramatic makeup, and absolutely no attitude. If a sketch deviated even slightly from the traditional mold, management trashed it immediately. These executives were so blinded by decades of dominance that they refused to see how the world outside their headquarters was shifting. They arrogantly assumed teenagers would always want exactly what Mattel told them to want. This belief that Barbie was invincible became their fatal blind spot. I could see why Carter felt his creativity withering away. The constant rejection of his modern, fashion-forward ideas left him feeling trapped and unheard. He was a prisoner of the pink, and the walls were closing in fast. Exhausted by the relentless corporate pushback, Carter finally reached his breaking point. He couldn't stomach another day of drawing polite pink ball gowns. In 1998, he took a 7-month leave of absence and retreated to his parents' quiet home in Missouri to clear his head. To pay the bills, he took a retail job at an Old Navy in a local Springfield mall. It felt like a massive step backward. He had gone from shaping the world's most iconic toy to folding denim shirts for minimum wage. But one afternoon, while driving home from a tiring shift, he stopped at a red light right outside the gates of Kickapoo High School. As the final bell rang, a flood of teenagers poured out of the building, and Carter was captivated. They weren't wearing neat, pastel dresses. They were wearing baggy jeans, chunky shoes, and midriff-bearing tops. It was the spark he needed. This un-Barbie aesthetic was a total revelation. These high schoolers had a fierce street style that Mattel executives would have despised, which made it perfect. Carter rushed home and began drawing girls with dramatic makeup, oversized shoes, and pouting attitudes. They were the exact opposite of everything he was forced to design in California. When his leave ended in 1999, he returned to his cubicle in El Segundo. But he wasn't the same compliant designer anymore. Officially, he was back to drawing safe, corporate-approved outfits. But the second his bosses looked away, he opened a hidden folder. He was living a double life, using his downtime at the office to refine his edgy teen dolls. He was literally using Mattel's own time, electricity, and pencils to build the weapon that would eventually destroy their empire. He wasn't a victim of their stifling rules anymore. He was a saboteur, and he was just getting started. Sketches were never going to be enough to start a revolution. Carter needed something physical, but he knew he couldn't just walk into the Mattel workshop and ask them to sculpt his rebellious creation. He had to get his hands dirty. In August of 2000, he waited until the design department was nearly empty, Then he crept over to a massive corporate trash bin and literally went dumpster diving. He dug through the waste until he found a discarded, defective doll head and a rejected plastic body. He smuggled those scraps back to his desk like contraband. To finish the look, he brought in a pair of chunky Ken doll boots from home, chopping them up to fit the strange new proportions he had envisioned. Right there in the heart of Mattel's headquarters, he Frankensteined those corporate leftovers into a prototype. When he looked at the finished product, he finally gave them a name that would haunt his bosses for years. The Girls with a Passion for Fashion. I find the sheer audacity of what Carter did next almost inspiring. He was still cashing a Mattel paycheck every single week while actively shopping his secret project to their fiercest rivals. In September of 2000, he secured a clandestine meeting with Isaac Larian, the CEO of MGA Entertainment. Larian was known for being aggressive and hungry to take a bite out of the Barbie empire. Carter walked into that secret office, opened his portfolio, and slammed his Frankensteined prototype onto the table. At first, Larian thought the dolls were ugly, but then he saw the vision. He saw the oversized heads, the chunky shoes, and the undeniable street attitude. He knew he was looking at the exact poison pill needed to bring Mattel to its knees. All the while, the executives back at the Barbie headquarters were completely oblivious. They were sitting in their boardrooms, patting themselves on the back for another year of safe, boring sales, having no idea their own employee had just handed a loaded weapon to their enemy. By October of 2000, the deal was finalized. Carter officially signed his concept over to MGA, and just 2 weeks later, he marched into his boss's office and simply quit. There was no grand speech or dramatic reveal. He just packed his things, walked out of the sliding glass doors in El Segundo, and never looked back. If you are enjoying this deep dive into corporate sabotage, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story of someone getting even. Over the next year, MGA poured millions into turning Carter's sketches into a reality. They named the dolls Chloe, Yasmin, Sasha, and Jade. Together, they were the Bratz pack. While Mattel continued, churning out the same polite, pastel princesses they had been making for decades, MGA was quietly building a cultural tidal wave. The momentum was growing behind closed doors, and the world was about to experience a retail earthquake that would leave the entire toy industry shaking. When the Bratz dolls finally hit the shelves in 2001, the reaction was explosive. Young girls who were tired of Barbie's outdated look flocked to the toy aisles. They saw themselves in the diverse skin tones and the edgy streetwear that Carter had first glimpsed at that red light in Missouri. The dolls became an overnight global phenomenon. When conservative retailers complained about the multi-ethnic looks and tried to only buy the blonde dolls, Isaac Larian didn't flinch. He told them they either bought them all or none. Carter had proven that Mattel's rigid rules were a financial disaster. But I have to ask you, do you think what he did was fair? He used his employer's resources to build a rival company. Was it a brilliant move, or was it just plain theft? Let me know what you think in the comments. Either way, his risky bet was paying off, and the Bratz pack was officially starting to devour Barbie's market share. Back at Mattel, the smug confidence was replaced by absolute panic. The executives who had laughed at Carter's designs were now staring at sales charts that were plummeting into the red. For the first time in history, Barbie was actually losing. Her monopoly was fracturing, and billions of dollars were evaporating before their eyes. At first, they tried to dismiss Bratz as a passing pet fad, but by 2003, The brand was only getting stronger. It was expanding into movies, video games, and massive lines of merchandise. But here is the part that really stings. The executives were baffled. They couldn't understand how a small rival company had captured the modern world so perfectly, while they were left in the dust. The corporate fortress was cracking under the pressure, and the desperate search for answers led them straight back to their own internal records. They were finally about to discover the humiliating truth of where their nightmare actually started. The realization hit the Mattel boardroom like a freight train. Through legal discovery and industry whispers, they finally pieced the timeline together. The billion-dollar franchise that was currently destroying their company hadn't been dreamed up in a rival lab. It had been designed right inside their own building by their own employee, using a doll head pulled out of their own trash can. The humiliation was almost more than they could bear. Furious and desperate to stop the bleeding, Mattel unleashed an army of corporate lawyers. They dragged Carter Bryant and MGA into a brutal, decade-long legal war. They claimed that because Carter was technically on their payroll when he drew those sketches, they owned every cent of the Bratz empire. The courtrooms became a circus of screaming executives and forensic experts examining old hard drives for evidence of a cover-up. Mattel was fighting tooth and nail to reclaim the very idea they had once told Carter was too edgy to exist. I watched as the legal battles dragged on for years, swinging wildly back and forth in a series of appeals and counter lawsuits that felt like they would never end. But the damage to Mattel's invincible aura was already done. Even though the courts debated the technical ownership of those early sketches, the brutal reality remained. Mattel's arrogant, stifling corporate culture had literally birthed its own worst enemy. By refusing to listen to their own designers and forcing everyone to conform to an outdated standard of perfection, they had alienated the very talent that could have kept them relevant. They lost billions of dollars in sales and spent hundreds of millions on legal fees alone. They suffered a massive, highly public embarrassment that forever shattered the illusion of Barbie's untouchable retail supremacy. The corporate giant had been brought to its knees by a single frustrated guy in a cubicle. Do you think Mattel deserved this? Tell me in the comments. For Carter Bryant, the journey was exhausting, but it was ultimately vindicating. He had walked away from a toxic environment that actively suppressed his artistic voice, and he had proven to the entire world that his vision was valid. Despite the grueling depositions and the endless stress of the lawsuits, he had achieved something truly monumental. He had successfully disrupted a massive corporate monopoly and created a permanent pop culture icon. Carter eventually moved away from the intense spotlight of the toy industry, finally finding the peace and creative freedom he had been desperately searching for since those stifling days in his El Segundo cubicle. He left behind a legacy that changed the toy aisles forever, proving that even the biggest giants can be toppled by one powerful idea. It is the ultimate story of corporate karma. Mattel tried to trap creativity in a tiny, perfect pink box, and it ended up costing them an absolute fortune. They learned the hard way that you can never truly control inspiration, no matter how many contracts you make someone sign. If you loved hearing about this billion-dollar revenge story, please hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the world's most satisfying corporate takedowns. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the very next video.